Hey folks, my name is Mo Amir and this is VANCOLOUR, British Columbia's bona fide culture and politics TV talk show. Tonight, we have a very special returning guest to talk about a wide array of topics, from the legacy of BC Premier John Horgan to whether or not we've learned anything from yet another government report about BC's toxic drug supply. Let's kick things off, however, by talking about your work week. Do you enjoy long weekends? I mean, who doesn't, right? Well, as the nature of work continues to evolve, some jurisdictions are looking at making long weekends permanent by virtue of a 4-day work week. And I'm not just talking about Iceland, where the 4-day work week is the norm. In fact, this month, right here in British Columbia, the city of Merritt is launching a 1-year pilot project where municipal workers will work 4 days a week. For years now, our guest tonight has been talking about exploring this idea province-wide. She is the MLA for Cowichan Valley and the leader of the BC Green Party, the philosopher queen of the BC legislature. She is Sonia Furstenau. Sonia, so nice to see you.
It's great to be here, Mo.
Always a pleasure to have you. I got to ask you about this 4-day work week. I feel like if you asked anyone, would you work less for the same amount of money? Everyone would say yes. But why are we having this conversation now?
I think we're having this conversation now because businesses, governments, institutions are starting to recognize that you don't get the most out of the people who are working for you by making them work more hours. You get the most out of them by putting their health and well-being at the forefront of how you're treating them. You get the most out of them by making your workplace one that is joyful and purposeful. And that what we are seeing from pilots around 4-day work weeks is that productivity stays the same or goes up, but satisfaction, happiness, well-being, health of workers goes up.
So this seems to be reversing the trend that we've had in terms of the work-life balance, where people are actually taking more work home. You're on your phone, you're doing emails. And so we're saying that we're going to scale that back?
Well, I think we should.
Yeah.
And I think think about what it feels like to have a long weekend, the 3-day weekend.
The best.
It's the best. You get 1 day to recuperate.
Yeah.
You get 1 day to do things you love, be in community, spend time with your family, go for a big hike, whatever it is. And then you get 1 day to kind of get ready for the week. Mm-hmm. The 2-day weekend really gives you the recuperation day and the get ready day.
Yeah, too short.
Too short. And what we see with 4-day workweek pilots, for example, is a lot fewer people calling in sick, a lot of people not having to take time off to get to appointments, to see their doctor or whatever they need to do. Mm-hmm. But again, a kind of satisfaction and happiness and healthiness. The other thing that we have is a labor shortage. So it's harder and harder to find people to work.
So how does this help, though? Because I feel like there are going to be employers that go, we're having a tough time finding people as it is. So to keep our operations running, a 4-day work week doesn't actually make a lot of sense.
Well, actually, it's a way to attract people to want to come and work for you. So in Cowichan, there's a number of companies now putting big billboards up on the side of the highway saying, hey, come sign up for our company and you get a 4-day work week. And the reality is, I think it's a recognition that we have to look at work in a different way. It can't just be about, you grind everything you can out of people. It's a relationship that you're in. And, it's not that we've been talking about a 4-day work week. In the BC Green Caucus for the last 2 years, the staff have had a 4-day work week.
Right.
And we're seeing in that legislature, we're a tiny team, 2 MLAs, 7 staff, and often you'll hear people, really comment on the Greens are talking to every bill, they're giving speeches, they're staying on top of all the legislation, the committee work, all these things. And we're doing it with a very small staff.
Right.
And they're doing it on a 4-day work week.
Okay.
And I didn't want to just say, hey, here's a policy I think we should try. I wanted to actually implement it in our own workplace.
So you've seen it firsthand, and absolutely your party is punching above their weight. I would agree to that. Is this something like daylight savings time, though, where we can't really implement it unless other jurisdictions, like our neighboring jurisdictions, whether other provinces or our neighbors down south, are also on board and kind of get on the same program?
No, I mean, I would take the example of Iceland. Spain right now is also doing a pilot. There's lots of companies in UK, Ireland, around the world that are doing this. In fact, I think what we should see is we should show the leadership on this. BC can become the kind of front line of Canada, working, creating the conditions that really make a 4-day work week work well. And there are, for example, if you look at a town or a region that says, okay, merit moving to a 4-day work week, if there's a kind of growing idea around that in that region, you start to attract people to want to live there. Right.
So it's almost like it has to start from somewhere.
It has to start somewhere, but it has started in so many places.
Yeah.
And the outcomes are pretty clearly beneficial. I really want to bring it back, though, to like health and well-being of people. Shouldn't we be working to create working conditions for people in which they are at their healthiest, they are at their best, they are feeling both valued, but also that their well-being matters to their employer? We would see a reduction in the burden on the healthcare system, for example, if people had that time to rest more, to be in community, spend time with family. All of these things we know are beneficial to people's health and their well-being. It's kind of what I think we should be striving for.
I'll tell you what, hat tip to Christia Freeland. If you throw in a Disney Plus subscription and a 4-day work week, I'm in.
Just couldn't resist, right?
Of course not. You were a big proponent of this all-party legislative committee. You really wanted this to happen. It happened, and then the committee released a report, and then you said that it was too timid and not profound. So ultimately, was this committee and the report writing, was this kind of all a waste of time?
Not at all. So the lack of, when I say it was too timid and not profound, I'm talking about the recommendations that came out of the report.
Okay.
The report itself is really important, and I really encourage people to read it, especially the part on what we heard. And the reason I was so enthusiastic about us having an all-party committee and having that committee hear from witnesses, we heard from over 108 witnesses on that committee. We sat through pretty much most of the summer. We had deliberations all through September and October. But in that what we heard, it was creating a shared sense of reality of what this crisis is and how it's affecting people in BC. And over during the committee, we would hear from other members of the committee and say, wow, I'm on a real journey here. I'm learning so much. This is so important. That was critical. We had to get to a place where we're not disagreeing about the reality of this crisis. Where we still need to go is to create the kind of political courage and political will to recognize that if we want to address the question of how do we stop people from dying, and we just got the coroner's report again today. It's 6 people every day. It's sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, friends. It's people with whole, complete lives, people who are giving back to society. We have to really understand that this crisis is affecting everybody. And if we want to answer that question, how do we stop people from dying so that they can then look to, okay, if I want to stop using drugs, there are avenues for that to happen. But in the meantime, the illicit supply is so toxic, so dangerous, and so chaotic that it is killing people every day.
Right.
And so safer supply, and as we heard over and over again, lower barrier access to safer supply, because right now there are a few thousand people in British Columbia who have access to prescription safe supply. There are over 100,000 people in this province using drugs. So we're talking a tiny percent of people have access to safe supply, and the vast majority are having to access a very dangerous, very toxic supply. And the problem being, because it's unregulated, people have no idea.
I guess my problem, though, is that in the recommendations, I mean, even the BC Mental Health and Addictions Minister said that this is a reiteration of recommendations of the past, right? So ultimately, I understand the process being fulfilling and rewarding to get everyone on the same page. But if the recommendations are the same and we don't really see any motivation to move more on those recommendations, then what is the point?
Well, the difference being that these are recommendations that have come from all three parties in the legislature.
Right.
This was not a coroner's report. This was not the death panel reviews. This was not the health officer. This was members of all three political parties. And I think that what's critical is something like the drug poisoning crisis be depoliticized, that it's not used as a weapon, that action on this crisis isn't used as a weapon by any political party and saying, how dare you do this thing? Well, you've got this report, you've got these recommendations. They include ensuring there is greater and more equitable access to prescribed safe supply across the province. That is, a recommendation there. And what we heard was, if you're living in Northern Health, there's very, very limited chance of getting access to prescribed safe supply.
Right.
But again, the chiefs of police came and presented to this committee, and one of their recommendations to us was low barrier access to safe supply. And I think we have to really always come back to this question. If we want people to not be dying from this poison drug supply, then providing access to a regulated safe supply is key to that. And then all of the access to treatment, to mental health care, to supports, to housing, to all of the things that people need to thrive. Yes, we need those too. And we need people to stay alive long enough to benefit from those.
Absolutely. Now, David Eby, who's set to be sworn in as Premier later this month, has talked about this idea of mandatory or involuntary treatment. What's your take on that? Because I've heard him talk about that, and he's basically said, listen, if there's someone that's going into the hospital multiple times a week or even multiple times a day because of poisoning, maybe they should be put into involuntary treatment. And we know that, it has mixed results, but does Mr. Eby have a point there that maybe some of these folks who will always try to get drugs from the street, not necessarily from safe supply, need to be forced into treatment?
We did not hear people recommending that. We did not hear experts recommending that. That was not, in any way a significant part of what we heard from this over 100 hours of testimony.
Yeah.
Let's start with the hierarchy of needs. We have tens of thousands of people in this province without a home right now. And what that means is you don't have access to a safe place to sleep. And try to think about what it's like to go 1 night, 2 nights, 5 nights, 10 nights without sleep, right? Let's look at, before we're talking about involuntary treatment and coercing people, let's look at, are people's basic needs being met? Let's start there. And I believe wholeheartedly that we can meet people's basic needs in this province. We can absolutely ensure that everybody in this province has a safe, secure place to sleep at night, has access to healthy food, has access to community supports, has access to services. Like, let's make that the thing that we're absolutely determined to achieve. And let's do it quickly, because we can. And that's what I'd like to see from David Eby as the incoming Premier, is action on meeting people's basic needs.
Absolutely. Sonia, you know that I love your advocacy on this file, so thank you so much, and I know that you'll continue to be a strong voice when it comes to this crisis.
I will.
So as I mentioned earlier, David Eby is going to be sworn in as the new Premier, but let's talk about his predecessor for just a minute. BC Premier John Horgan. I know you two have had an interesting relationship. When we look back at his tenure as Premier, what do you think his legacy will ultimately be? Because he was Premier during a very interesting time, whether it's the pandemic or just after 16 years of BC Liberal rule. how are we going to look back at him, in 10 years?
I really think there's two legacies here. There's the first term that he was premier in a minority government when there was the confidence and supply agreement between the Greens and the NDP. And the interesting thing about that period is that agreement was public. It had timelines attached to it. There were deliverables. And the public could kind of follow along like, hey, this is what's happening. And look, it happened on time. And we got banning big money, lobbying reform. We saw professional reliance reform, environmental assessment reform. We saw some good work on housing. There was a lot that got delivered in those first few years.
Sure.
So that's one legacy.
Okay.
And that legacy really shows you can work across party lines, you can collaborate, you can cooperate.
Yeah.
Then the second legacy is really the legacy of the majority government. And that came in after the election in 2020. And in the midst of the first few waves of the pandemic. And what we've seen from this government is less of that, like, here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to do it, and a little bit more kind of treading water feeling to this government. Big pieces of legislation in the first year were around adding a cost to freedom of information, for example, not really a good look for a democratic government. And so I think they're very different kind of examples of governance, the minority and the majority. And we kind of slip back to standard majoritarian first past the post governance in that it became quite adversarial again, kind of conflict driven, opposition and government kind of pointing at each other. And I think that it's an example of what we can achieve when we look at politics and government a little bit differently than what we usually do. And I think it's important to recognize that the shape and structure of a government does actually determine the character and culture.
Absolutely. Now, currently, the BC NDP seem to have some fracturing, the extent of which we'll know as time passes. And this all kind of stems from, or I should say is epitomized by the whole Anjali Appadurai situation where she was disqualified from running for their leadership. You as the BC Greens leader, do you see that as an opening to maybe bring on some people who are disaffected by the current BC NDP government?
Yeah, a lot of what Anjali had in her platform around climate action, around ending subsidies to oil and gas, around health reforms, those are things that we've been advocating for and working towards in the BC legislature. There have been 2 MLAs, really carrying the water on these issues for quite a while. And we have seen an uptick in new members in the BC Greens and kind of growing interest in reaching out and connecting with us. And what I would say is if you want to see real results on climate, environment, on social issues, on things like a 4-day work week in British Columbia, the most direct route to that is to elect more Green MLAs.
Sonia, as always, I think this is the 4th time we're officially doing this, 2nd time on the television show. It is a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
It's always a pleasure, Mo. Thank you so much.
Folks, that's our show. Thank you so much to the MLA for the Cowichan Valley and the leader of the BC Green Party, Sonia Furstenau. We will be recording some overtime, so find This is VANCOLOUR wherever you listen to your podcasts to listen to the philosopher queen herself as we'll really get into the weeds.
But what I would like to see, and this is how we can start to build in some accountability with the government, is on the same day a report is released from the government, from the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. And that report tells us how many people have accessed prescribed safe supply, how many prescribers do we have, how many publicly available treatment beds are there, how many people have been housed. Let's start deciding on the metrics that we're going to use to determine whether what the government's doing is actually succeeding.
Of course, we will be back next week right here on Check, but for now, this is VANCOLOUR and I'm Mo Amir telling you that in a province where you can be anything, be colorful. Peace.